All right, welcome back. We are now moving on to our next Biosphere Rule, value cycling. And we're going to explore then in this next series of videos the different strategies that we do around value cycling, right? And value cycling is once we have our collection of parsimonious, carefully selected materials, we then need to be cycling those materials through repeated versions of the products as we go forward. Now, this is a fundamental understanding. And if we look back, to the 16th century, Sir Francis Bacon actually was one of the part of the scientific revolution that began to understand something very fundamental about the material nature of our world. And he says that all things are changed and that nothing really perishes and that the sum of matter remains exactly the same is sufficiently certain. And this understanding was then became known as the conservation or the law of the conservation of matter. An understanding that matter is neither created or destroyed. Matter really is nothing really perishes. Matter stays the same and it's just transformed over and over again. And this is a fundamental understanding that we have not incorporated into the way we have built up our business and industrial world. And it's so fundamental that, quite honestly, you can say that you are made of stardust. The materials that make up your body, in fact, the materials that make up everything in this room where I'm recording this and wherever you are, those materials came out of the Big Bang and then the subsequent stellar implosions and explosions that then began to create the fundamental elements that we're based upon. And that the general understanding is that amount of matter has not ever really changed since that point. And so fundamentally, nothing ever gets thrown away, right? Nothing ever disappears. And that's something we have not taken into account. And it's very important if we are going to make our manufacturing and production process far more sustainable. The biosphere has this built in. So the Biosphere Rule number 2, value cycling, is about recovering and reincarnating those materials from these end-of-use goods back into new value-added products. Right? So it's a very fundamental approach. And unfortunately, this is not built into the way we do things. This is the model we teach MBAs. I teach in business schools, and this is the model we teach MBAs and business people to think about production, to think about manufacturing. And as you can see, it's a linear system, right? It's called the value chain. That's our model. And quite honestly, it's so popular because it's been very successful. It allows business people to think about the different steps, the different stepwise value-adding functions that the company needs to go through in order to produce a product. But clearly, there's a problem in that it imagines that there is a linear world in which materials can just be constantly pushed through this system with no consequence, right? And this is the fundamental challenge. If we actually were to look at this model, and we can call this model, the way it works really is a sell it and forget it model, right? So, you're trying to optimize and maximize the productivity of this value chain, which means you're trying to push out as much product as possible. So the real challenge is to go out and find a customer to buy that product, forget about that customer, go find another customer as soon as possible so you can get that next widget coming off the production line into someone's hand and the cash into your bank account, right? This is a real problem because it ignores the connections of this value chain, which is embedded here on planet Earth with us, right? And we understand about the conservation of matter. Nothing going through that value chain ever disappears. So there are two fundamental problems with this model that have been ignored up to this point. The first is on the upstream end, we're extracting natural capital from the environment. We're taking lumber, we're taking iron ore, we're taking petroleum, all of these things, we're extracting them from the environment and having, along with that, concomitant or consequent environmental damage, right? And then on the other end, when we sell it and forget it, we give these our products to our customers or the end user, and when they're done, they just throw it back into the environment, right? And that begins to accumulate as pollution and wasted resources. So this is the problem with the sell it and forget it model. And we've been able to get away with it for so long because the amount of natural capital that we have been able to access has been very large compared historically to the scale of our production, and the capacity of the environment to take our wastes has been relatively large compared to the scale of our operations. The issue though now though is human business activity, commercial activity has become global and so large that the amount of natural capital and the amount of pollution we are generating is overtaking the capacity of the environment to sustain that, right? So this is the fundamental problem. So and it comes to not, it's really a way of thinking. We actually sort of brainwash our MBAs to think in these terms. Now, as we've talked about before, there is a better model, and it's been figured out billions of years ago, and that's the biosphere. The biosphere understands how to do this. It does not operate in a linear sell it and forget it type model. What the biosphere functions is what we could call a value cycle, right? And the value cycle is this cycling, this constant cycling of these materials that are never created or destroyed. They're always with it, cycling them from one high value use to another high value use within the biosphere, within the organisms and creatures that occupy the planet. So the foundation of the biosphere is producers, right? The plants and grasses and flowers and the like. They take the sun's energy and they use that to combine materials together to produce then what we call biomass. And then that biomass is cycled through this trophic structure, this value cycle, this trophic cycle. So the biomass is eaten by a primary consumer like a grasshopper. The materials and the energy then become incorporated in the grasshopper. The grasshopper is eaten by the frog. The materials and the energy in the grasshopper then become cycled and incorporated into the frog. And we go all the way through, say, to the hawk, who's at the top of this cycle. And when the hawk dies, then it falls to the forest floor. And these decomposers, these other kinds of organisms, break down the materials, recycle them, and make them available for reincarnation into new organisms, new plants and animals, and allows this cycle to operate continuously for billions of years. Right? So this is the model. We know exactly what we have to do, and we can actually use this as an analogy or a metaphor for us to begin to think about how value cycling can be structured in our business systems. And what we have here, inside this value cycle, there is a substructure. There are different levels inside this cycle. They're called trophic levels, all right? And so at the very base of this trophic pyramid, as it's called, and trophic just means the process of feeding or eating. At the base of the trophic pyramid, the biggest part of it are the producers, which are the plants and trees and otherwise that use the solar energy to create biomass. And then that gets transferred up to herbivores. Those are the next level that consume and incorporate the materials from the plants into new organisms, herbivores, which are plant eaters, and then finally carnivores. So there's a structure within this that helps us understand how the materials and energy are cycled through this system. And we can begin to use the same kind of perspective, bringing it to our own human industrial production, our own products and services and the like, okay? So if we look then, we can begin to see levels of value cycling based on a similar type of trophic pyramid. I won't illustrate it as a pyramid, but at the base here are the materials level. This is the fundamental level. This is where we take natural capital and we refine it into raw materials that can then be used to create and assemble products. Those are the fundamental base level of this value cycling level. The next level would be the component level. And so these would be subsystems or parts of a larger product. And so this might be the electric motor of an electric vehicle, right? And we can think about then things at the component level. And then the fully integrated product would be the top level here, the product level. Say the automobile. So we can actually then begin to see opportunities for value cycling strategies at each of these different levels. So if we look at it here, we see the materials level, the components level, and the product level. And so we have what we're going to call a product cycling. We'll call these epicycling. Epi means above. We have shallow loop cycling where we're looping the components, and then deep loop value cycling or deep loop recycling where we're at the materials level. So at the top level here, this is where you're actually reutilizing or maximizing the productive use of an existing product. So you can think of renting an automobile, or you can think about leasing, leasing some piece of equipment. You can even think in terms of a hotel room, right? A hotel room is part of an established product, and we are actually renting or using that space on an ongoing method. So there's a number of opportunities here for product level cycling, what we'll call epicycling in our subsequent videos. The next level is we can actually then begin cycling the individual components, the subsystems that make up the product. What we can do is disassemble that and refurbish or remanufacture those components and put them back into a functioning product. So this would be shallow loop value cycling or shallow loop cycling. And then finally, at the deepest level, once the product and its components are so worn out that you can no longer do these higher level cycling, then ultimately you have to go to deep loop value cycling, where we're actually recovering the materials, we're regenerating the materials such that they can be used as equivalent as virgin materials in our next production runs. All right. So the subsequent videos in the series, in the value cycling series, will look at these different strategies at these different levels. All right. So stay tuned.